All right, this training is going to be on how to give the dating violence presentation. So this first slide is an introduction to CAPSA, and like with all of the other presentations, in order to give this slide best, you want to refer to the best practices presentation to know what information to share and how to best share it. So moving into this presentation, you're going to introduce the topic. So today we are talking about dating violence. This slide goes over the goals and objectives. You want to make sure that you let students know what you're talking about, because the conversation about dating violence can be very tough. With that being said, as you're listening to the best practices presentation, be really mindful of how to teach in a trauma-informed way, because with presentations like this, there will be conversations that are difficult to have and students may feel uncomfortable. So you'll go through, let students know what you're talking about, and then you'll get into it. So you start off by introducing how common dating violence is. You may ask, how common do you guys think dating violence is? Letting them know that this is something that is relevant to them and it's a conversation that needs to be had. After you've got them thinking about that, you'll jump in and do an activity. So you'll put this slide on the board that says dating, and you'll ask students, what comes to mind when you think of the word dating? What does dating mean to you? You'll get answers ranging from flings and talking all the way to committed relationships. Let students give as many answers as they can, because for each class, dating might mean different things. The purpose of this slide is to let students know that in all of these forms of dating, dating violence can happen. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be a committed relationship. Once you've established that all of these types of dating can have dating violence, you're going to jump in and talk about what dating violence is. To do this, you'll start by doing an activity where you help students remember the unhealthy behaviors that we talked about. So when we did the healthy relationships presentation, which is generally given the day before or maybe a week before we give this presentation, you talk about unhealthy behaviors, but only briefly. So this is a good time to review. To do this, you may write on the board verbal, nonverbal, emotional, physical, and sexual, and allow students to fill in behaviors that they feel fit in each of those categories. You'll then explain that any of these behaviors in any of those dating relationships, that's what dating violence is. So, going on, we're going to introduce an activity. So it can be confusing to students what the difference is between an unhealthy and abusive relationship. Well, relationships exist on a spectrum ranging from healthy to unhealthy to abusive. The key difference between an unhealthy and an abusive relationship is that abusive relationships are intentional. It's someone intentionally causing harm. In an unhealthy relationship, there may be factors such as miscommunication that aren't necessarily intentional but make a relationship unhealthy. So, with that being said, you're going to go through several scenarios with the class to help them really identify these differences and get comfortable with this concept. So, the first scenario, we won't go through all of them, but the first scenario is if you have a disagreement, your partner uses a silent treatment and won't talk to you for several days. So this is an unhealthy behavior. One person isn't necessarily causing intentional harm. There is maybe some miscommunication and some things that need to be talked about. But all students might not agree, and that's a great place to have conversation and reiterate those main points. So you'll go through several of these scenarios, and then you'll let the class know that we're gonna go through another scenario that's in the media. We're gonna go and view a music video that shows a lot of these behaviors, and we're going to identify behaviors we see and if we think they're unhealthy or abusive. So this video is Blank Space by Taylor Swift. So you'll show the class this clip, making sure that they understand that they're picking out those unhealthy or abusive behaviors that they see. Once the video concludes, you'll ask them to share. What behaviors did you see? You can ask them to do this in a small group, or you may do it as a class, depending on the class size, who your audience is. If you already have good control of the class, those will be factors that will contribute to your decision as to whether to do it together or broken down in small groups. But make sure that even if you break it down into smaller groups, you bring it back together You may do this by asking, so did we see abusive behaviors in this relationship? In which the students will answer yes. Unfortunately, a lot of times in the media,